Hey, it's Kara, your host. I'm here today because I'm often asked, what should I read next? Or what is your all time favorite book? And that is why I created this list. This list isn't a declaration of the greatest books of all time. Rather, it's a collection of the stories I can't stop thinking about, the ones I've recommended more times than I can count, and that continue to live rent free in my head. Whether you're looking for your next unforgettable read, or just want to see what books have shaped my reading life, I hope this guide of 25 books inspires you to discover a new favorite. Head on over to the link in the show notes or to bookishflights.com/read/25 books. Hi, I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Katie Powner. She is a small-town girl living in a lonely world. Katie grew up on a dairy farm in the Pacific Northwest. She spent her formative years climbing trees, talking to cows, and perming her hair. Now she lives in Montana, where cows still outnumber people. She's a happy wife and a mom to the third power, biological, adoptive, and foster. She writes contemporary fiction and has been writing for as long as she can remember. Today we are here to discuss her latest novel, When the Road Comes Around. Welcome to the show, Katie.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, Kara.
You are very welcome. Well, I love to start the show with, about who you are, because I feel like we are so much more than the bios on our page.
Yeah, the bios do give you a little glimpse, a little capsule, but it's hard to encapsulate a whole life, right?
Yeah.
So, like you mentioned, I did grow up on a dairy farm, which has impacted, I think, my whole life. That's the farm, we had about 250 acres, and that was where I spent most of my childhood. And then since then, I've pretty much always lived then in small towns and kind of more rural areas since then. And so you really see that come out in my stories. They're always set in kind of smaller towns, rural areas, because that's just what I know and that's what
Yeah.
I love and that's what I'm familiar with. And you have this whole little microcosm of the world in this little place where and everyone interacts. And I love that, and I love that in stories. So we now live in a small town in Montana. It's about 2,500 people,
Okay.
and we have a dirt road, and we have chickens in our backyard, and everybody in town, and every evening we go for a walk and say hi to all the neighbors, and
Love that.
and so it's a great place to raise a family. So I have my two biological kids, and then we have an adopted daughter.
Okay.
And then we've been fostering for about 9 years now. So we've
Wow.
had then about a dozen foster kids.
Wow.
So right now, our foster right now is 17 months. So
Okay.
that's,
That sounds like a busy and full life.
yeah, yeah, that's a good way to sum it up.
Yeah. So I grew up in a really small town, but my husband is in the military actually. And I find myself missing that aspect of knowing your neighbors, right? And having
Right.
that sense of community and this
Yeah.
community that will step up for you because you've known each other through the
Right.
years, which when you move every 3 years is really hard to
Yeah.
establish.
3 years is not a lot of time.
Yeah.
It really goes by fast.
Yeah. So, I mean, now we have, it's like I can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. We only have one move left. And I'm like, and then we get to maybe put down some roots somewhere
Yeah.
and start creating this community. I mean, if we live on base, it is a lot easier to make a community, but it is something I miss for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. That'll be a big change for you. That'll be good.
Yeah, well, we're here today. Your latest novel just came out, When the Road Comes Around. So if the listeners maybe haven't gotten to read it yet, why don't you tell them a little bit about it?
Sure. So when the road comes around, is set in Montana, set in Southwest Montana in a small town. The town is fictional. Um, and there's a ranch called Come Around Ranch that is near this town, and so a lot of the story takes place on the ranch. And a kid named Tad, I say kid, he's 24. To me, that's still a kid. He's kind of known around town for being a troublemaker. He's got a poor reputation, has a hard time finding anyone to hire him for the summer. But Dan and Anita at Come Around Ranch, they need someone for the summer, and they hire him on, hoping that giving him kind of a second chance, showing him some love and some grace
Yeah.
will help him get on the right track. And of course, things don't go as planned, and everyone's lives are upended by the end of the story, but in a good way. So
Yeah, I loved it. And I loved that. I'm trying to think of like how not to give too much away of the
I know,
story,
I
right?
know.
But the kid that gets a second chance, right? Of just like learning his backstory and learning he didn't have that at home and just that he had that opportunity was
Right.
such like one of my favorite parts and pieces of the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah. I totally feel like he's kind of an anti-hero, you know.
Yeah.
He's not a typical um protagonist, you know, he's not necessarily who you would choose as the hero of a story. But I think he really comes into his own by the end. So
Yeah, and everybody, I mean, I feel like so many of us read for like a happily ever after and maybe not in this rom-com type way, but just like
yeah.
that redemption that comes from a
Yeah.
story and it's so beautiful and apparent here.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Well, what is your wish for readers? What do you hope they'll take away when they read this story?
I think the story is really about grace. There's so much, you know, Dan and Anita obviously show grace to Tad by giving him the second chance and stuff, and then they have to continue to show him grace as things happen. But he has to show grace as well. He has to learn what that means, and then learn how to also turn around and give grace to others after he's been given grace. And so I think what I would like readers to take away is that idea that, like, no matter how much grace we feel like we are extending to others, we're always receiving more than we could
Yeah.
ever give back.
Yeah. And I think it's funny that you say that because what came to mind is I think oftentimes we think we're so busy, right? We're so consumed in the day to day and what we're doing. And it seems like, well, how could I extend this grace? How can I do more? Sometimes it feels like you're stretching yourself so thin to do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. And like that, just a little bit feels like a lot, you know.
Yeah.
But if you stop to think about how much you've been given, how much grace you've been shown, then that little bit that you give feels like, oh, I guess there's so much more. There's so much more to give.
Yeah, and I don't know much about fostering because we've never done that, but I imagine, I mean, that's a way you're extending grace every day.
Right. That is true. You extend grace. There's a lot of grace that you show towards the biological parents of the children.
Yeah.
But also even just the system is really difficult, and the system is pretty broken. I mean, everyone's aware of that, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so you're also showing grace even to the workers, the social workers and the licensing workers and all the people involved in the case. They're like doing the best they can with what they have, you know?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's really easy. It would be really easy to get down on them, like, you're not communicating, you know, or why do we have to wait so long? Or why did you do this? Or why can't you get back to me? Or, you know, but
Yeah.
we've learned a lot about grace in that, and just being like they're doing the best they can, just like we're doing the best we can. It's not like we're perfect foster parents either. And so they have to show us grace too. And so we've learned a lot about how everybody at every stage in that process deserves a little bit of grace, because we all have the same goal, just the child.
Yeah. If there's someone that's maybe listening to this and maybe interested in becoming a foster family, is there any advice you'd give them or a place to start where they could maybe start learning a bit more about it?
Yeah, that's a great thought. One place to start would be that I do have a blog and it's on my website, and the blog is about like our experience with adoption and foster care. And it's pretty transparent. And so that would be a good place to get a very real look at,
Okay.
what it's really like. And I think that's what I would say to most people. A lot of people will say like, oh, I've thought about that, or, you know, maybe someday I want to do that. What advice do you have? And I always say, the children that are dealing with this, the children that are going through foster care, they are going to be going through it with or without you.
Yeah.
They're going to be struggling. They're going to get passed around. They're going to be confused and scared, whether you're there to help them or not. And so if you keep that in mind, it really, I think, helps your perspective with when you think about,
Yeah.
well, should I do this? How should I be involved? How does it affect me? If you keep that perspective of the child, and that whether you're there, whether you're sacrificing, whether you're giving or not, doesn't matter. They're still
Yeah,
they're
they're
still
still
good
in it.
same position. So that really impacts me, because then I think, well, I'd rather then be there for
Yeah.
them to carry some of that load, you know? And so I tell people that, because sometimes that is a bit of a nudge. Maybe that's the nudge that they need to actually take the next step, because it's easy to think about it and talk about it. Um, but what we really need is people to actually put it into action.
Yeah. So not think about it, talk yourself out of it.
Right. Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
consider.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll make sure to include links for your blog in the show notes as
Cool.
well.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So this isn't your first book you've written, but tell us,
Right.
what have you learned about yourself through writing?
That's a great question. I think one thing I've been really surprised about since I started writing novels, I mean, I've always been a writer, so I've
Mhm.
always been writing something, but I've only started writing actual like full length novels for the past I think like 10 or 11 years.
Okay.
And so in that time, when I started doing that, I've been really surprised how much real life gets into a story,
Yeah.
how much um how much of it's not made up, I guess. Because
Is that
I think
unintentional as well?
I think I thought, I have to make up a story. I have to come up with a story, and I have to make up characters and all this stuff. But it actually turns out that all the pieces you need for a story, for a character, for a plot, are all around you all the
Yeah.
time. All I'm really doing is putting the pieces together. And that really surprised me when I first got it.
Yeah. And maybe just started paying attention to it, right? And then
Yeah, and I
being,
started paying more attention, being more observant, exactly, and realizing, holy cow, there's great material happening all around me every day.
yeah, feel like we have talked about this so much on the show in so many different capacities. Is just like taking the time to slow down, and whether that is to observe your surroundings or to
Yeah,
read or to just take some time for yourself, or reflect on your day, but just taking the time to slow down to do some of these,
yeah.
what we might,
And to notice, yeah,
yeah, to notice.
and
And I
write
think
it down.
we'd be amazed.
Yes, I agree.
Well, how in your busyness do you find time for writing? And then we'll get to reading here shortly, but how do you find time for all of that?
That, well, it depends on whether or not we have a foster baby in the house. When we do, um, I have to kind of make my schedule around their schedule. And so I do my writing pretty much during nap times. So to do that, I have to make sure that when like nap time comes, I'm already ready.
Yeah.
Everything's already prepared, and I know where I'm going and what I want to accomplish, because I don't have any time to waste.
Yeah.
There is no time to waste. I have this hour and a half, and they're going to wake up, and and that's it.
Yeah.
So you have to be ready to sit down and get to work right away. And so I've learned to do that. That took a lot of practice, to kind of find how to make that work for me, so that I could actually get somewhere and make some progress.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's not easy, but it definitely I think another thing then that I've learned about myself through the process, I think, is just like how much I rely on then planning and preparation,
Yeah.
and how pivotal that is to doing this work.
Yeah. I think it's amazing what a mom can do with 5 minutes because you just know, like, I don't know when
She
I'll get
has to.
another 5 minute
Yeah. So you do
segment.
what you have to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think also, I would imagine you have to be kind of, I always think I have one day in the week that I work on the podcast where all my kids are accounted for. And I have to also kind of set boundaries. Like, this is not to run groceries or doctor's appointments or do other things. Like, this is strictly to work on the
Right.
podcast. You have to
Right.
be protective of your time.
Right. Yeah. Because when people say, how do you find the time? Of course, the cliche answer is you don't find it, you have to make it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, we all know other things pull us away, right?
Yep.
Things
Yes.
around the house or,
Constantly.
yeah. So it's just being
Constantly.
protective of that. Who was your favorite character to write in the novel?
Oh, that's a great question. I think probably Sam. And in this story, Sam does have some point of view chapters, but that was not the original plan. In
Oh,
the
wow.
first
Okay.
draft of the story and in first draft, he did not have any chapters himself. And as I was going along, I kind of realized I really wanted his perspective and his voice to be part of the story. And now, of course, I can't imagine it without that.
Yeah.
Um, but originally, he actually that was not there. So I think that Sam was probably my
Yeah. I feel like he adds a magical touch to that story for
favorite.
sure.
Yeah, I felt when I finally realized, oh, he needs to have a voice too. It all just clicked. I was like, duh, I can't believe I didn't see this sooner.
Well, and I think one thing that scares me away from writing is like how many times you have to go back over things. And knowing myself when I was a student and like how I would just like to get it done and be done with it and never see it again, I'm like, I don't know that I could do that piece.
Yeah, yeah. There's no, I mean, until that book comes out, there's really no just moving on. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
just constantly going back and revising and rethinking and second guessing everything.
Yeah. And I guess one other last question about your writing life. Are you working on any other upcoming projects?
I am currently finishing up a couple things.
Okay.
And then I do have another book coming out in April. And so I'm kind of working now on getting everything ready for that
Yeah.
release.
Yeah. I know you have to work kind of far out.
Right, exactly. And you, again, that planning and preparation I talked about earlier, that really comes into play with the publishing schedule as well, because you're
Yeah.
always kind of having to look like a year ahead or even more. Um, what am I going to do next? What's coming next? And if I say, where do I want to be in 5 years? That starts now. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And that's hard to think about sometimes. It's
Yeah, it
hard to like
is.
think that far
Yeah. And
ahead.
it can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I haven't had anybody come on the show and say that. So I'm like, wow. I mean, I knew obviously far out, but 5 years, I mean, that's perspective for sure. So, well, thank you so much for sharing that. Let's switch gears a little bit and let's talk about who you are as a reader. What type of genres do you enjoy?
So that's an interesting question because I read very widely. I love a good like mystery or thriller, not too gruesome.
Yeah.
And I love literary fiction. I read a lot of that. I also love like funny, quirky type stories. I think of like Man Called Ove or like
Yes. Yeah.
The Borrowed Life of Frederick Fife. I don't know if you've heard of
I'm
that,
reading
but
that right now.
oh, that I love that story. Like just stories that are just kind of fun and quirky like that are
Yeah.
I love those. I love historicals that I learn from,
Yeah.
like that I learn about something that I'm like, I've never heard about this, or I had no idea that
Yeah.
this happened, and you can kind of like learn part of history while, enjoying a story. I love that too. So I read really widely um, in the general market and the Christian fiction market.
Yeah.
And I don't read much romance. That's never been a favorite of mine, but pretty much anything else.
So, how do you find time for reading?
Um, I I luckily am a really fast reader. So I can cover a lot of ground. And I typically really only can read, in the evenings after the kids are in bed.
Yeah.
Um, that's really my only real reading time, or sometimes during, like, I'll take a lunch break from work. And if like the baby's, he'll be there like eating, but sometimes I have a little time then to read then. So that's about it, like for time. But since I am a pretty
Yeah.
fast reader, I still am able to read.
That's great. Well, you have been so gracious to bring up Book Flight with you. Can you tell us how you chose these three books?
Well, I had so many things that came to mind for things that I could talk about, themes, or topics that I could bring a flight about. But that whole idea of adoption and foster care is what then really came to mind, that was on my heart, because not only obviously is it a big part of my life, but it's something that has been showing up quite a bit in my work as well. It tends to show up in my stories, even if I didn't really plan for it, because it's such a big part of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the theme is adoption and foster care, or just kind of even unconventional family situations.
Okay. Well, I am so intrigued. What is the first book you brought today?
The first book is All the Children Are Home, by Francis. And this book was like gut wrenching. It was, and I don't know if it was more so because I'm a foster parent, so
Yeah.
I'm part of that
You really
world. I think
understand.
maybe that
Yeah.
made it even, it was kind of a little hard to read, but so well written and so interesting. And it's set in the 50s and 60s, which is also interesting because as a foster parent now, obviously it's not the same as it was then,
Yeah.
but kids are still kids, and families are still families. That hasn't really changed. So in the 50s, going into the 60s, there's a family and they have fostered kids and then adopted some, and their kids are kind of getting a little older, and they kind of think they have sort of settled on, a family, and it's working for them. Um, Not knowing how fragile, that really is, until then this CPS asks them if they'll take in one more little girl who's 6, and would you please take her? And they do, and it kind of, it disrupts everything, which is very realistic.
Yeah.
um, and brings all kinds of things to the surface that have to be dealt with, and it changes their lives. But it's a hard journey though to get, to that growth is a hard journey. And that again is very realistic. So this book to me, it was, I would say, like I use the word unflinching, like it takes a really unflinching look at
Yeah.
what that's really like to bring in a traumatized
Yeah.
child into your home. And so I would highly recommend that book to anyone who is, like you said, thinking of doing foster care or something, then you
Sure.
should read that book. Sure.
Wonderful. So that was All the Children Are Home by Patry Francis. What's the next book you brought today?
So The Nature of Small Birds by Susie Finkbeiner, which Susie Finkbeiner is one of my favorite authors, just as an
Yay.
aside. Um, And so this story also then it's a family with an adopted daughter. And what's really unique about this story is there's three different point of views, but each point of view is looking at it from a different timeline. So they're all part of the same family. There's the dad and then the biological daughter and the adopted daughter.
Okay.
And so those are the three perspectives. And each perspective, though, is from a different year. And so they're looking at
Wow.
the situation from a different point in time. So
Yeah.
it's a really unique way to deal with it, and just super well done. So it's in in the 70s, like in 1975, I think is when all of these kids, thousands of kids, were airlifted out of Saigon, to and brought
Mhm.
over to America to be adopted by Western families. And so in the story, the girl who's adopted was one of those kids. And so
Okay.
then she now, in her timeline, she's, older and now wanting to learn more about her past and her family and stuff. And then the father he's trying to support her in that. And then the sister, the biological sister, she then is in the timeline back in the past uh, when they were younger, her and her adopted sister were younger, and how that affected her at the time. And so you just get to see like kind of the different stages in their lives and
Yeah.
how, because that adoption affects them, there's ripple effects, right? And
Sure.
so you kind of see that in all the different stages from the different perspectives. So it's very, very good read.
Wow, that sounds amazing and such a, like you said, a unique way
Yeah,
to
really
tell a
unique.
story.
Hmm.
I have to definitely pick that
Yeah.
one up. I'm like, gosh, I don't, I'm trying to think if I've ever read one like that, but
Yeah.
that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So that was The Nature of Small Birds by Susie
Yeah.
Finkbeiner. And then what's the last one you brought?
So it's called Just a Regular Boy by Catherine Ryan Hyde. And this was a super interesting story as well. And it touches on foster care again. And this story, so there's a young boy who basically he was taken into the woods by his father, who's a survivalist, and raised in the woods, kind of off the grid, with this whole like you got to learn how to survive type thing. And his dad was suffering from quite a bit of like mental illness. And so then his dad passes away in the woods and the boy's alone.
Wow.
So he does obviously have then a lot of survival skills, but he's pretty young. I think I want to say he's 8 or 9. Um, and so he tries to survive on his own for a time, but obviously at some point he has to try to find help and he's pretty feral from living in the woods
Yeah.
for years with just his dad. Um, so he eventually, without giving too much away, he eventually gets picked up, by CPS and taken to a foster home, where they have to deal with some really severe, trauma and abuse that had happened, and trust issues, obviously attachment issues, all the things. Um, but and I would say for this one, from a foster parent perspective, this one is maybe a little bit not super realistic as far as how things, how they work out in the book, as far as
Okay.
being realistic. Um, but sometimes in a story, you have to you do what you have to do to, Um,
Yeah.
so I wouldn't say it's super realistic as far as like the foster care process and how that really works, but it was very realistic in how that abuse and trauma affects a child, and how it affects their everything about their life, and also then how it affects a family when they then arrive carrying that into the home. So that part was
Yeah.
realistic, and so I really enjoyed that book too.
Yeah, and I think all of these you're kind of talking about like just that ripple effect,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's to the child and everything in their life or to the ones that take, the homes where they go. And I mean, just how that affects everybody. And
Right.
that's
Yeah.
interesting to look at there. So that was Just a Regular Boy by Catherine Ryan Hyde.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for bringing those books with you
Of
today.
course.
I can be adding all of them to
Yeah.
my TBR because I haven't read any of
Yeah.
them. So I love when that happens. How I love to end our show is with our bonus pairings, which are a speed round of questions you can answer really quick.
Okay.
Are you a rereader?
No, not usually. I mean, there's only a very, very select couple books that I read. Otherwise,
Yeah.
no.
And very select amount of time
Yes,
to
exactly.
do
Exactly.
it. So, what is one book you've read that has changed your life?
There's a book called Summer of Light by Dale Kramer. And
Okay.
that book changed my life because I read it right when I was kind of starting to write novels and was sort of realizing these are not what I was writing is not the same kind of stuff I was really seeing in Christian fiction. And I didn't know if there was really place for a voice like mine in Christian fiction, where you're writing like protagonists who are like older men and not a romance. And like that was just kind of unusual. But when I read Summer of Light, that's what it was. The main character
Yeah.
was a guy. It wasn't a romance. It was more literary. And it was I loved it so much that I was like, this is what I want. I realized then this is what I want for myself. is to be this kind of a
Yeah.
writer. So that kind of changed, I think, the trajectory of my life.
Yeah, sounds like such a pivotal book for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then where is your favorite place to read?
Read. Oh, well, I have a swing outside, and I love to sit on the swing and read in the sun in the afternoon during nap time, if I can, or if the baby's playing, in the grass. And I just sit on that swing, and the chickens are out there, and so they're like making their noises, and I that's like my favorite spot to be.
Yeah, you got some little white noise going on with the
Yeah.
chickens and Well, lastly, what are you reading next?
What am I reading next? What am I reading now? After I just started a book called The Survivors, and it's a memoir of uh he's a grandson of a man who was, in the Holocaust in a camp. And so it's the
Okay.
grandson's memoir about how that experience of his grandfather's has then kind of how it changed his whole family, again, that
Yeah.
ripple effect. Then that's
Yeah.
what that book's about too. So I kind of just started that. So I'm going to say that one, even though I already started it, because I don't know what's going to come. I don't know what I'm going to read after that,
Yeah.
but I just started that one. And so I'm going to use that one.
Well, that's a great place to have. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show with me today. I know your time is precious and I appreciate all you've given me.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today with Katie Powner. Her book flight includes books featuring adoption or foster care or even unconventional families. We'd love to hear what other books you'd pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. If you enjoyed the show, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Your review not only helps the show, but it also helps the podcast to reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure you will not miss an episode. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.